Unbeknownst to you, I've been humming part of the Katamari Damacy theme.
That would be 100% unbeknownst to me because I know nothing about that game other than that's the
You're
thing
right.
with the kind of pill-shaped head that becomes a giant ball, right?
Sure, close enough. Those terrible explanations that resemble the game in no way go. Perfect. Very good. Well done.
It's enough knowledge for me since it's never been part of my life.
Apparently, nobody in your house wants to know anything. That's fine.
Because clearly that game is the be-all, end-all of wisdom and knowledge.
It's true. Anyway, hi. How are you?
Derailing you quite efficaciously.
Oh, efficacious. Somebody got a word a day calendar.
Actually, I used to get those. They're usually Scrabble word a days, but still.
Look who's not surprised. How are you?
I'm a little loopy, but totally awesome.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And yourself?
I am present and accounted for.
Present, pretty,
In
and punctual?
theory? No.
No, you definitely weren't punctual.
I was not. This is the final Digressions and Dragons of the year.
Like with any live performance, the last run always gets a little loose.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's also, and we will get to this in further detail later on, it's also the final appearance of the About a Book series on Digressions and Dragons. This will be, in case you missed me talking about it the last episode of the show, we're things are going to change, but we'll get to that. That is not a thing we're going to talk about right now. That's a later thing.
It's a later thing. Good to know.
That's a later thing. And we've got a lot actually to talk about this time around. So we're not gonna, fiddle around too much, if we can possibly avoid it.
It's a good plan.
How it is.
100%.
And we're gonna dive right in because this is going to be a different discussion than the discussions we have had about books before around here.
Partially because I don't think we're going to worry about spoilers.
No, we are not going to worry about spoilers. Would you please, to begin with, tell us what book we read and then summarize said book for us?
Oh, you like having me summarize things.
I do. You're good at summarizing. You have a summarizing disposition.
Thank you.
Carry on.
All right. So, folks, we have, in fact, read The Hogfather. And if you have not, turn off this episode, go read it, and then come back. We'll be here. No worries.
Correct.
You good? Okay. So the book that you clearly just read recently is called The Hogfather by Terry Pratchett and is about a certain I'll see if I can say it today. Anthropomorphic personification of the holiday spirit. A holiday which is similar to but legally distinct from Christmas.
Now, what do you mean legally distinct? That's why even go there?
Because it's part of the phrase, similar to and legally distinct from.
All right. Okay.
It is of an uncanny resemblance in tradition and form to Christmas. Only something's gone wrong, and the Hogfather, who may or may not be analogous to Kris Kringle, is gone. And the other anthropomorphic personification, Death, has decided to fill in his shoes so that the sun will rise upon the humanity of the Discworld.
Mm-hmm.
Now, while this is going on, there are all of the, bits and bobs of daily life happening. You've got she's not a nanny. Is she a nanny? Governess? Governess. That's the classier term. There is a governess taking care of 2 children. There are wizards going about their wizardly business in the wizardly school.
A lot of people are of the opinion that the summary should be shorter than the actual book.
Well, it is. And then now I'm just going to pull out all the different threads. Okay, basically, the Hogfather is gone, and Death is filling in his shoes while someone else figures out where he's gone and how to bring him back.
That's a summary.
No. That's not a summary. That's not even a blurb. That's not even an elevator pitch. But you put me on the spot.
Yes, I did.
Summarizing a Discworld book. That's just mean. Like having me summarize Hitchhiker's Guide.
See, it's like you didn't even mention the Discworld. It's a book. It's a book. It's a book.
Stop.
Terry Pratchett wrote The Hogfather. Terry Pratchett wrote Hogfather. There's no the there.
There is no the there. I habitually put the in there, though, because it's about the Hogfather.
It is a book set in the famous Discworld, making it, I think, the 20th Discworld novel, if I remember correctly.
1996.
And
that's all I can remember right now.
Something like that. And it is essentially about the analog of Christmas on the Discworld called Hogswatch, which is presided over by a gentleman known as the Hogfather, who is analogous to Santa Claus.
Chris Kringle.
Carries much of the same traditions in many of the same ways. The auditors of reality, who are those folks or those entities who wish to see the smooth ordered running of the universe, have taken against the Hogfather because he is illogical and makes no sense. They like things to be well ordered and accounted for.
I would say it's because he's a symbol of all things illogical that make no sense.
Correct. He doesn't operate by any normal rules. They have decided that he must go, and that by making him go, they will gain control of not just the Discworld, but finally the universe entire. Death, who is a personification of what we think of as death, skeleton and the scythe and the whole shebang there. Death decides that this is not okay. And he is therefore going to do things which will prevent the Hogfather from disappearing entirely. It is noted throughout the book that children don't really believe in the Hogfather anymore. Parents certainly don't. He's exploited now for commercial purposes, and it's all going to sound very familiar to you. When you compare, say, Hogswatch to Christmas, and the many and various things that we now do with our Christmas, it seems as if Discworld parallels quite nicely. But there's always more to it than that, and that is the book we have read is the more to it. What it comes down to is this. These auditors of reality hire an assassin to kill the Hogfather.
Inhume?
Yes, they politely refer to it as Inhume. The method by which they choose to do this, or this assassin chooses to do this, is to take a small team of very bad people indeed, lead them into the land of the Tooth Fairy, who also exists, and perform some of the oldest magic possible. That is, the sympathetic magic worked upon the teeth of children. Some of whom, since all the teeth are collected by the Tooth Fairy, some of whom are now adults. So if by controlling those teeth and those children and adults, they can make them all not believe in the Hogfather will cease to exist. So if the Hogfather ceases to exist, the auditors will have gained their control and everything will be hunky-dory. Death is the sort of individual who keeps track of everybody. Death notices that the Hogfather's lifetimer, as it's called, the little sand hourglass through which the grains of sand pass, marking out the Hogfather and everybody else's life, he notices that has been tampered with, and he decides that that's not allowed.
Well, it's not allowed. There is an order to things, and they are subverting the order, if not with direct application of personal attentions through corkscrew methods, basically.
Right.
And that is frowned upon.
It is frowned upon.
As discussed in other books as well.
The practical upshot of this is Death himself decides he's going to take on the role of the Hogfather and go around ensuring that people continue to believe. Trick is, he's not allowed to directly interfere with the auditor's plans. However, Death has a granddaughter who is a governess who can interfere, but she's notoriously contrary. So Death may or may not have to finesse the situation in such a way that she decides to take an interest, because he's confident that once she does, she can sort things out. And Susan Stowe-Heelett is quite formidable when angered. One of the reasons is she sees things because she is Death's granddaughter. She sees things that are really there. Monsters under the bed in particular. She's very good at actually seeing those and then hitting them a lot with a poker. So she seems like the ideal person to go fix all this. In the course of events, and the god of hangovers, otherwise known as the O God, is conjured into existence, as is the Veruca gnome. And the, what else is, the sock eater.
The happiness fairy.
The happiness fairy, and several other beings who normally don't exist, but because the Hogfather no longer technically exists, there's this excess of belief running around. In other words, people who would normally be believing in the Hogfather aren't. So it's much easier for them to believe in other things that only sort of kind of exist. Like the sock eater is responsible for you only ever getting one sock back out of a pair after you do laundry. You see, logically, it's as good an explanation as any for the fact that socks only come out in singles instead of pairs. And that's how this kind of works. So there's a hair loss fairy, which apparently removes hair from people who are losing their hair and have no valid explanation for it. And a number of other entities get involved in this whole thing. It's a big, complex book with lots of good characters and lots of fun things going on. It eventually ends up, I suppose. And here's the big spoiler. If you don't want the spoiler and you haven't read the book yet, shame on you. We just told you to do that a little bit ago. You should have done that.
And then come back. And if you did come back, you're totally good to keep listening.
Right. It turns out that what actually is going on is more sinister than we've led you to believe so far. The Hogfather, on Discworld at least, is what we'll call a repurposed god. It used to be that he was the god of the sunrise, a sun god, basically. Okay, it was his responsibility to make sure that the sun came up every morning. So what really happens if he can be made not to exist is the sun does not come up in the morning. And thus all life on the disk ceases to exist, which is to the auditor's liking because then everything can be well ordered and perfect without being messed up by messy, complicated, confusing humans. I don't know. How do I want to explain a very serious kind of theme running under this book, which is that you need to believe in things, okay? Whether that's a Hogfather or something else, you need to believe in things in order to work as a human being. Right? There are things where, unless you believe in them, you can't operate as a normal person. And there's a beautiful section in this book that kind of explains all that. I'm going to hold that for a little bit, though.
I was wondering
I'm going to hold that for a little bit. The practical upshot of which, though, is by the end of the book, naturally, of course, things are sort of back to normal. But in order to get to that stage, Susan basically has to exercise as much belief as possible in the Hogfather, along with the assistance of a certain computer. It's a magical computer. It's allowed to believe things and believe them really well. And eventually she has to retrace the course of the Hogfather's journey to becoming the Hogfather in order to restore him to his proper place. I believe we've discussed sufficient amounts of the plot to kind of get people on their footing, I think. And I have a question for you.
Yo.
Oh, first off, I don't have a question. First off, I have a statement. Then I have a question that you can answer in a statement.
Okay.
I am my rating for this book is 5 stars. Or 10 out of 10, or all the enchiladas. Whatever your rating system is, this book gets all of them.
The enchilada system, huh?
For me, okay? So then I have to turn and ask Leslie, because there are 2 people on this show, and it's not just me.
Really?
I have to ask Leslie, what was your rating for this book?
See, I have trouble giving it the 5 stars because...
What?
Okay, there's only one reason, because when I give a book 5 stars, it's because the 4 stars is it's a well-made, beautifully crafted, 100% wonderful piece, and that 5th star is 100% me. And I love the Hogfather, but it's like, I don't know, because I love Guards, and I love Night Watch, and I love We Free Men. It's like, is this one of the best Pratchetts? But that's like saying, is it like one of the best I don't know, something else amazing. So yeah, let's be honest, it's going to be a 5-star because it is one of the ones that I read every year. So
I was so close to just walking off this podcast and letting you babble your way out of that mess.
No, it really is. It is a 5-star. But not all Discworlds are for me. Not even all watch books are for me. And the watch is my favorite arc. Either. So,
but this book, this is we agreed that this is a 5-star book, right?
I say no. Am I out of having to help you with anything from the future? Yes, Brian. No, this
you're a terrible person.
I really am. This is a phenomenal book, and it is one of the books that I treat as an entryway to Discworld because it covers so many bases so beautifully, and it makes you think a lot about what it means to be human, how it means to interact with people, what the function of belief is, what the meaning of holidays is.
The question I started to ask and then had to reroute is, why is this book so good?
Beautifully crafted, functions on many levels, is hilarious, appeals to people of any number of belief systems. It's just a good book.
This is an important book to me. Okay? It's like, it's probably one of the most important books I feel like I've read. And it's a work of fiction, and it's a fantasy book, and it's comedy, and there's no real reason why it should be important. But it's important to me because it helped me understand that we are basically the stories we tell ourselves. Okay? If you seek to understand something, you have to tell yourself a story about it. And granted, this is probably obvious to a lot of people, but in that story you tell yourself is where you start from in trying to understand something, whether it's an important something like, I don't know, like, My Nation is Important. Okay. Or it's a little story like, why does the water come out of the tap? Right? It's all because of stories we've told ourselves. Some of those stories are accurate. Some of those stories are inaccurate. And sometimes it matters whether the story you're telling is accurate or inaccurate. Why do people disagree about whether the earth is flat, shall we say? Because they've told themselves different stories. All right. Some of us have told ourselves stories that involve the globe and the shape of the earth being globular and, the movement of bodies through space and time and the long history of, the universe forming and all this other kind of stuff, and they've made logical story points out of all this stuff to get to a point where they can believe, hey, the earth is round. Other people have not. They have told themselves an entirely different story about people sailing off the edge, about, the sun going around us, about all this other stuff that have led them to conclude from their story that the earth is flat. Okay. So in a large extent, what you believe to be true about a thing is the part of the story that you have used to convince yourself. And the nature of belief is such that in order to change the way you think about something, I have to tell you a story that you find more convincing than the one in your own head. So what it comes down to, for me, is that this is the book that sort of put this all into perspective for me. All right? Why do we argue about dumb stuff? Why do we, we're gamers. This is technically a gaming podcast. Why do we argue about the way to play a game? Why do people think that the rules are more important than the narrative in a Dungeons and Dragons game, or vice versa? It's because the stories we've told ourselves about how these things work lead us to one conclusion or the other. And in order for me to convince you, say you're like, oh, it's all about the mechanics. In order for me to convince you that it's not really all about the mechanics, yes, mechanics are part of it, but it's not all about mechanics. It's about some other stuff too. I have to tell you a story that helps it make sense to you that that is the case. And this whole book, you take the Hogfather and you look at everything that happens in this book, throw out all the bits about Tia Taimi, and he's the assassin, and, the Tooth Fairy and all that kind of stuff, although that's interesting information. Throw all those bits out. They don't really matter, because that's not the point of the whole book. All right. The point of the whole book is to help, I think, to help understand that we need belief in order to keep going, and that belief relies upon us telling ourselves the right sorts of stories. Okay. The important chunk in here is literally down to, it's like 3-4 paragraphs, maybe page and a half in the book altogether. And it's this whole discussion about, okay, so Susan is talking to Death, her grandfather, and they've essentially, they've solved the main problem of the novel. The Hogfather is back. Okay. And this is the entire point of the book done in the paperback version in about 2 pages. Okay. So she starts out, she says, "Thank you. Now tell me." And then Death interrupts and he says, "What would have happened if you hadn't saved him?" She says, "Yes, the sun would have risen just the same, yes?" "No." "Oh, come on. You can't expect me to believe that. It's an astronomical fact. The sun would not have risen." She turned on him. "It's been a long night, grandfather. I'm tired. I need a bath. I don't need silliness. The sun would not have risen." "Really? Then what would have happened, pray?" "A mere ball of flaming gas would have illuminated the world." They walked in silence for a moment. "Oh," said Susan dully. "Trickery with words. I would have thought you'd have been more literal-minded than that." "I am nothing if not literal-minded. Trickery with words is where humans live." "All right," said Susan. "I'm not stupid. You're saying humans need fantasies to make life bearable." "Really? As if it was some kind of pink pill?" "No. Humans need fantasy to be human, to be the place where the falling angel meets the rising ape." "Tooth fairies? Hogfathers? Little—" "Yes. As practice, you have to start out learning to believe the little lies, so we can believe the big ones. Yes. Justice, mercy, duty, that sort of thing. They're not the same at all." "You think so? Then take the universe and grind it down to the finest powder and sieve it out through the finest sieve, and then show me one atom of justice, one molecule of mercy. And yet," Death waved a hand, "and yet you act as if there is some ideal order in the world, as if there is some rightness in the universe by which it may be judged." "Yes, but people have got to believe that, or what's the point?" "My point exactly." Okay, that's the whole point of the book. Right there. It's about belief, and the things we hold as important are often just the things that we happen to believe with no real proof. There's no proof of the existence of those things. We make it up, and then we act on the things we've made up. And to me, that's very important to understand, because without that piece of information, you can't do anything for or with anyone who hasn't told themselves the same story as you. And this, to me, is way bigger than just a little novel that's kind of fun to read and very enjoyable. It's more like, it's kind of almost a way to see the whole rest of the world. There's this whole thing going on in the world right now where people are not talking to people who don't have the same set of beliefs or the same stories in their head, right? We're creating little bubbles for ourselves of people who tell the same story we tell, right? And to a certain extent, you do have to do that. But to a much larger extent, there's no way once you start doing that to get somebody else into that bubble with you, who maybe needs to be there and doesn't know that. You have to be able to talk to other people about their stories, understand their stories, and then tell them a new story that helps them overcome or understand or rationalize or whatever. You have to be able to bring them into your fold. You have to be able to tell them a story that will help change them or make a difference for them. And I don't think you can do that any other way. Because you can recite facts at people all day long and they won't listen to it. They won't even want to hear it. Without a story to go around them to make sense of those facts, you've got nothing. And that's why I think this book is important. And this is why this book gets 5 stars for me.
One of my favorite lines that is, I think, revisited more than once in Discworld, but I know it comes up in the Hogfather, I think twice at least, is Death marveling at the human capacity for invention. And specifically in a world or a universe filled with as much wonder, they invented dullness. Like he's offended by it. And so it's the very existence of death, the whole theme of the anthropomorphic personifications as it goes through specifically this book. I mean, Death has his own arc in the Discworld books. It's an aspect of humanity that is very important to me. It's not so much the nature of understanding one another all the time as understanding ourselves and our place in such a gigantic, chaotic, involved, detailed world that is just overwhelming. So we tell ourselves stories so that we can format some kind of understanding. And as someone who feels lost on a daily basis, at the simplest of tasks, I find that being able to put words around something, even if it is an abstraction that doesn't apply directly, helps ground me as a person, give me the strength to move forward. And that is something I really appreciate about this book amongst the other Discworld books. It's just kind of capturing a concept that has weight and importance in my life. Also, you get the beautiful, beautiful phrase in this book of where the falling angel meets the rising ape. And it's just, it's very good stuff. I'm just going to sit here and be quiet again. Because there's so much going on in this book. It is all of these giant, important concepts and this exploration of humanity and belief and understanding. And it's also just a Discworld novel so that it doesn't feel like you're reading a treatise on humanity and belief.
I'm not entirely certain how he managed to do it.
I don't know. He is an insanely gifted man.
The hope is, I think, that if you haven't read the Discworld before, this novel will open the door for you, and you will look at some of the rest of this Discworld stuff and enjoy it. I, of course, think you should read every one of them.
I think you should read almost every one of them. I have a couple that I would forgive you for skipping.
I'm going to post an article, or actually I'm going to link to an article I've already posted about this whole Discworld, the Hogfather thing that I wrote some time ago.
When we lost him?
That one.
It's a good article. You guys should read it.
Hopefully that will clarify things for you. I'll link to it in the show notes and whatnot. But I also, you have, Leslie, you have a couple of novels you use as entry points for people. Would you share those with us, please?
Okay, Hogfather is a good one. It is far enough into Discworld that he's really got his rhythm and his pacing, and he's developed a great cast of characters. If you don't know, the Discworld books, there's 30 plus, I think like 36 or something. And
I think there's more than that, but yeah, carry on.
But I mean like main novels. I don't know.
Yeah.
But this is a shared world. You do not have to read them all in order. It really does help in the end, and I would encourage it. But you can also read selections without losing the beat. So I typically recommend starting points of certain arcs. So Hogfather is not one of those, but it is well balanced in touching on a number of things. It's centered in Ankh-Morpork, which is the greatest city of the disc. Then we've got Guards, which is the beginning of the Guards arc, which is about the Night Watch initially of Ankh-Morpork. Going Postal is also set in Ankh-Morpork. It is one of the later books, and thereby everything is a little bit more developed, but since it's centered around a specific character, you don't need to have as much background because he himself is new. And I do love Weird Sisters. I'm not 100% that it's the best Witches book. It is the first of the Witches arc, but it's a really early book at the same time, so the pacing is still, the structure is not quite in his stride just yet. I'm missing one that I recommend. Small Gods.
Oh, yeah.
Small Gods is standalone. One of the few that is not directly tied into any of the arcs. As with most all of the books, it touches or is touched by previously or externally established plot points, political situations, or whatever in the text, like in the larger world of the disc. But you can read Small Gods by itself.
Yeah, I would say if you are going to follow on from Hogfather, that Small Gods should be the next one you pick up, because they're closely related in theme.
Yeah, no, it's another exploration of belief. It is an examination of belief centered in a sort of situation that might sound very familiar to people. So because the disc world is kind of a funhouse mirror of what is referred to as the round world, you'll see lots and lots of parallels beyond just Hogswatch. And they're called out now and again so I just finished going through Guards, which is one of my personal favorites. And one of the kind of running gags is you're following this adventure of this beaten down policeman who just pounds a pavement and doesn't get any respect and is kind of a mess. But periodically you get moments of, he resonates with the universal policeman, and you get, sometimes it's a joke, like the Watch's saying is Fabricati Diem PVNC. Just clue and make my day punk, throwing that out there. Things like that. But then there are larger concepts as a whole, such as the church. And I do refer here to the Christian church predominantly. And what Small Gods is a structured religion that is sort of tearing itself apart from the inside with adherence to tradition above belief. And when it is time for the god to come back, because what has happened to the belief structure of this population, it is in an unexpected and underpowered way. And he connects with not a major player in the church, but rather the humblest of brothers to be found. And it is how that brother goes on to reform the whole thing, really.
Yeah. And
it's not like he's this ignorant putz. He is uneducated, but this brother has the gift of it's eidetic memory. Is that the right word?
Yeah, I think that's right.
And so he has all of these concepts and this perfect memory, and then is suddenly thrown out of his box of this religion into the larger world. And things he learns and realizes what's going wrong. And unlike a lot of people, he has his god on hand to discuss it with him at the time. It's very interesting. And I don't find, for all the jabs or comments that are made about the church, I don't as a rule take offense to them, because I think Pratchett loved people and stories and life, so that when he addressed topics, he would make side-eyed comments about, what people do in the name of a god for one reason or another. But when he is examining humanity, he's poking fun at all of it. And it might not be 100% in love, but he's never hateful, which in something that so frequently deconstructs concepts near and dear to our hearts is very impressive.
Yeah. He is, I got him, if you'll read the article I'll link to, I got him in response to Douglas Adams passing on. And, I was introduced to him at that point. He's not a writer like Douglas Adams. He's a totally different writer.
Yes.
They're both taking a genre and writing comedy within that genre, but But the Pratchett approach and the Adams approach are two totally different things. And I think all in all, Pratchett comes off better than Adams ever did or ever hoped to do. And I'm okay with that. You know, as much as I liked Adams, I like Pratchett a lot more.
I won't lie. I'm only familiar with the major players in Adams canon. I don't know much beyond, well, a couple of Doctor Who's, Hitchhiker's Guide, and then the Dirk Gentlys, which are my preference,
right,
of the Adams canon. But I feel like Pratchett was more interested in the craft and concept of a story than Adams was. Adams had his grand schemes and his fun and his cleverness, but I feel like it wasn't as lovingly assembled in a way.
Mm-hmm.
Also, I mean, Adams did not have the time that Pratchett did.
No. Adams left a little early.
I don't remember how old he was, but it was not old enough.
Well, he's 40-something.
And another really cool thing about Pratchett, which is not his books, but it kind of goes back to my theory about the fact that he loves life and people and everything. He was very active and very honest. He got Alzheimer's, and that's actually what took him in the end, I believe.
Yeah. Kind of. Well, I mean, he decided to exit before it.
That's another discussion.
Yeah.
But it's related. And he went out of his way to encourage people to work with it, to progress through it, to be honest about it and share. He also was very proactive for orangutans.
Yes, that is correct.
And I feel like there is something else, but
he was a very good near humanitarian.
I don't think he'd appreciate being officially titled anything.
Yeah. Yeah. So, okay. Check out the Discworld. Besides just the novels.
Oh my gosh. Hold on. I am so sorry. I missed 2 books. I know. You're like one gateway book into the series. No, there's a million ways to walk into this book.
Right.
And I'm sorry. There are 2 YA series. Well, there's a YA series and a YA book. So We Free Men is technically its own arc. It is the Tiffany Aching arc. It is connected to the Witches, but you do not need to read the Witches to get it. And The Amazing Maurice and His Educated Rodents is a retelling, quote unquote, of the Pied Piper story. And it is a delight. It's pretty dark, and I really want Leica to make a movie of it because I think they could do it well.
Right.
Kind of like, how I'd want Jim Henson Company to do We Free Men.
Sure.
But one way or the other, those are also very good. I have a habit when my friends have kids, I always get a chapter book to be read to the kid when they're too little to read their own books. And We Free Men has been on that list multiple times for different families. I don't just keep getting them the same book.
That's okay. Because I was just thinking while you were going through that list, I was thinking to myself, you know what else I need to mention? He's co-written some nonfiction books as well. And if you're particularly interested in carrying on the theme from Hogfather about human beings needing to be able to tell themselves stories and things, then you'll want the Science of Discworld series, including in particular, I think, Science of Discworld 2.
We don't actually have those, which makes me sad.
Yeah, it's seeing modern sort of popular science kind of stuff through a Discworld lens, which makes it very interesting indeed. You'll learn about the Round World Project and other things. And they're just for the science part of it, they're well written, but they also delve into some stuff about what we will call Pan-Narrans, which is the storytelling ape, and you can find out all about that, I think, in Discworld 2. So there's lots of ways to further enjoy the Discworld if you like this book.
There's like 5 Science of Discworlds. There is also the Folklore of Discworld, which is what I have on my shelf, which these are books that tread the line of the mirror, basically. They kind of tell you a little bit about things that are real to us and how they were echoed on the disc.
Right.
The one I have specifically, I know discusses the chalk, which is a place in the disc, on the disc, and the great chalk drawings of a horse or something that discusses the chalk drawings that are in England.
Right.
So cool things kind of every which way. There are companion books. There are some beautifully illustrated books. Last Hero is actually the book that got me back into Discworld. I tried one of the later books, made a poor choice. Do not start with the book Thud.
No.
That one is very deeply steeped in all of the watch books that have come before it. The Last Hero is, as far as I know, only available illustrated. It is illustrated by Paul Kidby. It is phenomenally beautiful, and it's also a very good story.
Yep.
If you're starting at the beginning, make sure you have both The Color of Magic and The Light Fantastic. They are the same story. They're just in 2 books. I just always have to throw that in because some people are boneheads like me and want to start at the beginning. So, have both.
We are at the end of an 8-month-long experiment. And part of this 8-month-long experiment was this book club thing that we are now finishing up at this point. Hogfather is the last book in the book club. It's the last book of the year, and it is.
I think it's my only 5-star of the group.
This is the last thing. It's the last book we will ever review formally on Digressions and Dragons, because while this. What do you mean, quote unquote? There's no quote.
Formally, unquote. What was formal about this review?
Yeah, whatever.
It's a little squishy too.
All right. The experiment had some successes and had some not so successes, and I thought we would just really sort of quickly go through and see if we can't encapsulate in very small words, very short sentences, how these other 8 books did. You know where we are in the Hogfather.
Don't it. Read it. If you don't like it, we will forgive you.
No, we won't.
I will forgive you.
She will forgive you. She's much nicer than I am.
I think they might have figured that one out, but okay.
Yeah. We started, unfortunately, on a not so hot note with Empire of Imagination by Michael Whitwer. If you'll remember, it was supposedly the biography of Gary Gygax and the birth of Dungeons and Dragons. Now Leslie wasn't reading with us necessarily at the time. That was a Scott and I book. It was the only Scott and I book, in fact, and we could have chosen better for starting with. It's a not recommended unless you really like to suffer. You can then by all means go ahead and read that.
I wouldn't say it was suffering to read it. It was underwhelming and spottily written. The presentation was very awkward and more cumbersome than the text really could support. There's some good information in there, and there's some, actually, if I remember correctly, it's got a further reading list or something in the back. There's a lot of good titles there. Yeah,
there's some stuff in there. I mean, it's not entirely horrible, but by and large, it's not the way you want to come to the story of Dungeons and Dragons and Gary Gygax and all that. It's not. It doesn't work well. The next book we read was The Golem and the Genie.
The Golem and the Genie.
Yeah, whichever way you want to do that. Which was on the whole an excellent book, I thought.
I believe it was your first 5-star.
Yes, it was quite good.
I appreciated it. I thought it was well done. I was not as enamored as Mr. Bryan, but I am not as erudite as Mr. Bryan either. And he enumerated a series of very good reasons it was well made.
Right. The that was a book recommended to us by a listener. I can't remember who that was.
Was it Nitsua?
Right, it might have been. It probably was Nitsua. And as a listener suggestion, it was a good first attempt. I liked it. It was an enjoyable book. I am anxious to see what the sequel is going to be like. Notice anxious does not mean anticipatory. More like will she be able to pull off a sequel to a book that seems largely finished?
My opinion honestly went down when I found out that it was supposed to be a book 1.
Yeah, I don't think it was written as a book 1, though, is the deal. But we'll see. Time will tell. After that, we had Hoax, A History of Deception, 5,000 Years of Fakes, Forgeries, and Fallacies by Ian Tattersall. If you're short on cereal boxes with information on them, then by all means read Hoax. Otherwise,
or if you'd rather have a more informative, better written, and more interesting presentation of the information, I would say, is it Cracked? I want to say it's Cracked.com has a list of random historical information in lists, sometimes longer, sometimes shorter, more interesting, better written, and less bitter, oddly enough. These people had a chip on their shoulder the size of a very large family Bible.
Yes, almost exactly the same size as. It's not a recommend. It is an avoid.
It's pretty. That's the main thing it had going for it. It was a very pretty book.
There are pictures in it, yes.
It was well designed.
Sure, go with that. From there, we read the utterly uninteresting and unadventurous tales of Fred the Vampire Accountant, otherwise known as Fred the Vampire Accountant #1. Another reader suggestion that this one sadly did not sit very well. It was not terrible, I didn't think. It just wasn't great, or I didn't. That's not even fair. It wasn't terrible, but it also wasn't anything that was going to make me want to read more.
Let's just say that the utterly uninteresting suited us.
Yeah, that was accurate
in a not ironic way.
No, it's as near as I can tell, a series of short stories written for Drew Hayes's blog that were then assembled into a book, and probably could have used a little more work than just a blog entry. Thank you and good night.
Sci-fi daytime vampire adventure.
Yeah, that thing.
No, I mean, sorry, Sci-Fi, SYFY, Sci-Fi the Show channel.
Oh,
that is the vibe I got from that book. Was it would not surprise me if Sci-Fi picked it up and made an adventure sitcom kind of situation.
That seems accurate. I feel like that's accurate. The next book was a pick I made called Doctor Who: The Pirate Planet. I liked that book. I enjoyed that a lot.
I enjoyed it as well.
Yes.
It's a Douglas Adams episode.
Yes, a novelization of a Douglas Adams episode of Doctor Who. And there's not really anything wrong with that sentence. It was a lot of fun to read. It was very entertaining. And I felt better than the actual episodes that it was written from.
You weren't distracted by the budgetary limitations.
This is true. So we enjoyed that. We recommend that one. If you like Doctor Who, even if you don't like Doctor Who, read that anyway. Maybe you'll develop a liking of the older Doctor Who's. I
honestly feel like if we're going for Douglas Adams novelizations for Doctor Who, I support The City of the Dead over that, but we didn't read that for this.
Right. And Shada is another excellent one as well.
I haven't gotten to that one yet. I need to.
Yeah, all three of them actually are really good by this James Goss guy. I think they're all three by him. Can't remember now.
I think so.
And then we come upon what is for me the most disappointing. And I mean, that's saying a lot. I mean, there's flat out didn't like, which is, Empire of Imagination and Hoax. But in terms of disappointment, Mistborn is the winner. The first Mistborn novel by Brandon Sanderson, if you need to be told that, did not sit well with me. In fact, it sat so badly that I failed to finish it in fairly extravagant fashion. There's a lot of words and not much going on. That's my general summary of the book.
Fair enough. It was disappointing for me, mainly because I have a lot of very intense Sanderson fans in my life. And the funny thing is, after talking to them a bit about how underwhelmed I was by this introduction to the series, they're like, well, yeah, the later ones are better.
Uh-huh.
So basically what you're reading up in Mistborn 1 is the setup,
yes,
apparently, for everything that comes after, which is unfortunate because it's not what you want to read.
It doesn't do a very good job of it.
If you're going to read Brandon Sanderson, don't read that one. Apparently, you can probably start with the beginning of the next series set in that world, or you can just read Rhythmatist, which is my personal favorite.
Uh-huh. Yep.
Brian's never going to read Sanderson again, so it's a moot point.
Never. in a million years.
But that's okay, because the next book he was madly in love with.
I loved it. And it has interesting parallels. The 5th season, which is also the first part of a series by N.K. Jemisin. And the 5th season I liked. It had some very interesting parallels with Mistborn. But on the whole, I really like this one. I like it more than I like the Golem and the Genie.
Which was a 5-star. And this was also.
The 5th season is a very fine novel, I think. And it is probably the most deliberately written book I've encountered. Certainly within the reading of the book group, and possibly within the last, decade. I'm
willing to give that. Deliberate is a very good way to put it. I struggled because it is fairly coarse in presentation and content at times, and I tend to play on the family-friendly side of things.
Right. There's a lot going on in the 5th season. You do have to pay attention when you're reading it.
Yes.
And you have to be able to connect things up in your own head.
Which is hard for somebody like me who has a bad memory. Brian did point things out, and I did feel guilty.
But yeah, definitely read the 5th season. That is, if you like Mistborn, give the 5th season a try and see if you don't like it better than Mistborn. There's a challenge. And of course, we've ended up on Hogfather. You have heard what we think of Hogfather, the Discworld, Terry Pratchett, and all those things in general. You, I think, would have a hard time going wrong within Discworld if you started at Hogfather. I think that's a worthy thing to do.
Of course, like I said, there's a number of other places to start, but Hogfather is one of the ones I recommend. Mm-hmm. And it's great fun to give to somebody around Christmas time.
Yeah. I'm looking at this. I'm looking at our list of books, and I prior to this, I had the impression that we had not had a very successful.
Yeah, you were being really grumpy about that too.
Apparently, but as I look at the whole list, I realize fully half the books were things I liked. Now, admittedly, Hogfather was a deliberate pick because we knew we'd like it.
As was Pirate Planet, if not knowing how much. None of the others had been read before. We have both, if you could not tell, read Hogfather before.
Yes.
I have read all of Discworld more than once, except for the 2 books that I don't really recommend. That being Eric.
Yeah.
And The Crown of the Shepherd.
Eric is a weird one, and The Shepherd's Crown. The Shepherd's Crown is, yeah. I don't want to backtrack, but The Shepherd's Crown is, you can leave it, I think. Yes. It's unfortunate because it is his very last book.
But it shows that it's his very last book, and that he did not get to complete it in the way that he would have wanted.
But anyway, the point being, fully half of our books were okay, So that's not a bad track record. I was introduced to 2 books in 2 series that I was previously unaware of, and am interested in reading more of. So that's good. And I think on the whole, this was more successful than not for us as the primary readers.
I actually did not give a single star review at all.
Oh, good.
That goes back to the whole I'm a lot nicer than Brian, guys.
This is true. The book club comes to an end for the year, and I think as far as being a reading group for Digressions and Dragons, it comes to an end forever. I do want to thank everybody who made suggestions, especially if you're sitting there screaming because we didn't pick one of yours and had several bad experiences because of it. But I also want to thank 51 people who joined the reading group for this little experiment.
Yeah, we only had a handful that were active in discussing, but we did get feedback.
Yep.
And we had
kept track.
Good number of suggestions. Admittedly, a number of suggestions we obviously didn't and couldn't take.
Mm-hmm. But I'm happy to say that people did participate. They did read along with us in many cases, and they all provided some valuable feedback and information. Now, the question is, sir, and or madam, as the case may be, what shall we do from here on in?
We read what we want.
Right. I think that's going to be important because there's some books where it was like, I wouldn't be reading this if I didn't have to do it for this. And some of which would have been abandoned far earlier in the process.
I just want to throw this out there. I will say that this process has brought into my life a book that I enjoyed really substantially more than anticipated because I saw it on the shelf while I was picking up a book for the book club. Brian did not have that experience because he doesn't go to his library.
No, my library is a poor, sad thing which never has any books I want to read. Much like my game stores around here. Weird. It's almost like there's some sort of field of dullness in the
It's like the opposite of what happens in Good Omens.
Yeah.
It's not on my shelf.
There are a couple of things to take note of for us from here on. One is we're going to read what we want from here on out. But what difference does that make, you ask, since the book club is ending? Well, we think that we can do something interesting.
There's that we again.
Yeah, there's that. You guys apparently, and with no evidence, like Leslie. Don't know why.
Wait. So how can you know that they like me if there's no evidence?
Because people have become confused and tell me that they like you. I don't know.
Doesn't that count as evidence?
No.
I mean, circumstantial at best, but...
No. It's inadmissible in this court.
This is a court?
It is now.
Oh, man, I did not dress for the occasion. I am wearing my transit hoodie, though.
Good. Glad to hear it. Do try to keep up. Anyway, you guys like Leslie, and so that means that if I was ever going to do a podcast with somebody where I talked about books and things, then Leslie would probably be that choice. So that's what we'll do. We will make a podcast about books with Leslie that will be its own independent thing, and no longer tied to Digressions and Dragons, because frankly, it needs to find its own audience. The DI&D audience is not necessarily the prime audience for a book reading podcast. So we're gonna break it off into its own thing. It's gonna be a whole deal all by itself. I don't know how much you necessarily want to know about it, but at this point, it looks like what's going to happen is we each are going to read whatever books we want to read. And then each month we are going to pick one of the books we read in the previous month to talk about on a show. And we're each picking a different book from a different set of books, because we're not working from a list or anything. We're just going to read whatever. And then out of the whatevers that we each have read, we will have a discussion about them. Fairly brisk, fairly directed, something we will take more notes on rather than just sitting here faffing about.
That's a good way to put it. I'd say that's fairly accurate. Sorry, guys.
Yeah. We underestimated the amount of preparation that would actually be needed to do this properly, I think. Or at least I did. And I have now re-estimated the amount of work that will need to go into it.
There's going to be an actual order.
Which is why it's only going to be once a month, for one thing.
Fair enough.
It will have its own website. I will make that available to you once I have got it all set up and running the way I want it to. In addition to talking about one particular book for each of us, we will keep a running list of the books we have read in the month, and then it may be that we write some additional bits about those books on the website, so there will be stuff to read and stuff to listen to. We think that's kind of cool.
Also, it gives us further opportunity for engagement.
This is true. You can come chime in about anything you might have heard or anything we might have said. And
I mean, technically, you can still totally suggest books. We are just now under no contractual obligation to read them.
This is true. I mean, always feel free to pipe up. I just got a book recommendation today from somebody, and that will go on my list of things to read. What do you mean? What is it?
I want to know what it is. Exactly what I said.
Well, let's see. Empire of the Summer Moon.
Empire of the Summer Moon. That sounds involved.
Juana Parker and the Rise and Fall of the Comanches, the most powerful Indian tribe in American history. Okay? There you go. See, there's a book you can start reading right now. I don't know if I'll be reading it, but it's a suggestion, and we welcome it. because I like
Interesting.
suggestions.
I'm going to completely forget that this was suggested, but it looks very interesting.
Sure, there's a thing. Anyway, yes, feel free to make suggestions either on the website or through an email or whatever, which I will have set up eventually. I do not have it set up now. Do not email me yet.
Ooh, here's a question.
I will merely lose it. Yes, hello.
Will I have more access than Scott does?
What do you mean?
Am I only going to get tangential access to the email?
To the emails? I don't know.
I can be well behaved.
I've seen no evidence of that.
I'm not going to argue the point right now.
Okay, fine.
Since I've been impressively tangential today.
The show is going to be called Book.
Yes, it is.
You can figure out why, because there's 2 books, one for each of us. See, book. Anyway, another problem we encountered, and I encountered this 8 times, and never successfully figured out how to do it the first time. Any of those 8 times. I don't like Goodreads and the interface and the way they handle reading groups.
No, he really doesn't.
Too difficult.
He really doesn't.
It's far too difficult to add and subtract things and move them around and all that kind of stuff. So, the Goodreads platform will be abandoned. And I think, as things look right now, I'm much more impressed with Library Thing. And I've only just discovered it and started checking it out. But
I think that's funny because I have had a Library Thing account for many moons.
It's interesting because I think if you really want the geekiest website about books that you could possibly have, I think Library Thing is that site because, well, let me give you a couple of examples. For one thing, and I realize this has no real bearing on its ability to track and keep books organized and that kind of thing. But for one thing, it will tell you how tall your stack of books is.
Oh my gosh. Is that where you got that?
Yes. My height. How high is your book stack? My stack of books is higher than the Washington Monument. It's approaching St. Louis Arch height. It's so geeky that it actually tells me how many IKEA Billy bookcases I will need.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. Okay, so we've got, mine is obviously not nearly as impressive as yours. It's also well out of date. Mine is slightly taller than Cleopatra's Needle, but not quite as tall as the Sphinx, which is super cool.
Wow, you have totally different measures on yours too.
Well, yeah, because I've got a little dinky thing. I like that the very first measurement available is a double-decker bus. Neat. And then it's Michelangelo's David.
My first is Niagara Falls.
Yeah, no, Niagara Falls is my last. I'm in a completely different category.
Okay.
We knew that would be the case, though, babe. That's just the way it's going to be. Okay. And then there's total pages.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, this is so
Apparently,
cool.
I will need 36.75 IKEA Billy bookcases to house all my books.
I think it also might struggle with mine because I have a number of books that they did not actually have in there. So I feel like I have another couple feet. Where is
I have also, just because I have 11,149 smoots worth of pages.
What's it? What? How many elephants?
How many elephants?
Yeah, I've got weight. I've got adult badgers, 26.93 adult badgers.
I have 40.49 adult badgers worth.
Well,
I have
0.085.
I have 0.085 of an elephant.
I have 0.057. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. See?
If all pages in the books relate end to end.
Oh dear. Okay. All right.
Okay, there's your smoots. What is a smoot?
That is Library Thing, and I'm going to move my stuff there. My stuff is already moved there, frankly.
I've actually need to go through and update my library because I know that I've gotten rid of a number of books, and I definitely am missing books that I have.
So yes, we are going to go over to Library Thing, which is at, strangely enough, librarything.com.
I can't wait.
Imagine. So if you want to join us there, you can join us there. We're not set up yet all the way, but my account is there and Leslie's account is there, and we will link to them in the show notes.
Yep.
Is what we will do. Other than that, I think we're starting in January. I think that seems like a thing we're likely to do.
That sounds like a thing we're likely to do. But the problem is, if we're doing that and we're talking about a book that we read the month before, are we talking about the Hogfather again?
No.
Oh, okay. I mean, I have to read another book this month.
I know it's rough. Try to keep up.
Okay.
So there you go. That's what we're at. That's what we're about. I want to thank everybody who's read along, participated, suggested, kept up with whatever this part of Digressions and Dragons, and it is much appreciated. It really is. We tried an experiment, and it was successful enough to spawn its own thing. So there you go.
I just want to say thank you for giving me a good reason to bother Brian directly for an hour or more routinely.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
I was invited, man. You did this to yourself.
I know. It's all my fault. Well, I guess that means it is finally at the point at which I have to say thank you for following along with us, and that is it. We are definitely, for this part of the show, out of time.